A seemingly forgotten promise drives a veteran to journey halfway across the world, 40 years later, to find a boy from the sunlit countryside of Hoi An. Can human connection, memories, and a simple watch bridge the gap between two lives separated by war? This extraordinary story will keep you captivated until the very end. Phil Seymour, a sergeant in Company C, 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division of the United States Marine Corps, arrived in Vietnam in December 1966. Just a month later, he was injured in action. By June 1967, Phil was stationed on a small island near Hoi An in Da Nang. Despite the location, he often ventured inland to explore Hoi An. On these trips, he carried a small dog named Boot in his pack, a pup he had rescued during a jungle mission when it was still nursing. Whenever Phil and his comrades rowed ashore, local children would eagerly run to meet them, clamoring for American goodies such as candy, canned food, and even cigarettes. The Marines frequently shared items from their rations with the children. Among the crowd was a boy named Cam, possibly spelled Cam or Cam, who stood out for his calm and resourceful demeanor. Unlike the other children, Cam didn't push his way to the front. Instead, he lingered in the background, observing quietly. At first, the Marines thought he was shy, but they soon realized he was shrewd. Rather than begging empty-handed, Cam brought local produce, coconuts, bananas, lemons, to trade, which quickly earned him the Marines' affection. One day in June 1967, 9-year-old Cam offered Phil a banana. Phil, preparing for a week's leave in Thailand, asked Cam what he would like as a gift. Living in a remote village with no knowledge of Thailand or its offerings, the boy couldn't articulate a specific request. After some thought, he pointed to the wristwatch Phil was wearing. The sergeant smiled and agreed to bring him one. However, once in Thailand, Phil forgot about the promise. Like most soldiers on leave, he was preoccupied with enjoying his brief downtime. When his leave ended and he returned to Hoi An, he saw Cam running toward him, beaming with anticipation. At that moment, Phil remembered his promise, but he hadn't brought the watch. Shortly afterward, Phil's unit was reassigned to the demilitarized zone. By January 1968, he had left Vietnam entirely. Phil often reflected on his time in Vietnam, leading an otherwise peaceful life with few regrets, except for the unfulfilled promise he made to a boy in that poor village. It remained a lingering regret, one that stayed with him through the years as a symbol of his unintentional broken promise. A native of Brookline, Massachusetts, Phil went on to serve another 27 years in the military. He earned a master's degree in law and became an attorney at the Pentagon, eventually rising to the position of chief prosecutor before retiring in 1995. Despite his accomplishments, he believed he would never return to Vietnam. Then in 2007, Phil's wife, Lynn, told him that their travel group had organized a tour of Southeast Asia, including a stop in Hoi An. She encouraged him to join the trip, a rare chance to revisit Vietnam, find Cam, and perhaps finally fulfill the promise he had made 40 years earlier. When Mr. Phil returned, Hoi An had already become a famous tourist destination, recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Its architecture had remained virtually unchanged since its founding in the 15th century, when it flourished as a bustling trading hub connecting Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, and later European merchants. Phil believed the chances of finding Cam were nearly non-existent. He had no way of knowing if Cam had survived the war, especially since this area had been a hotspot of conflict. Despite the uncertainty, Phil brought a watch with him on this journey just in case. Phil's tour guide, a man from Hanoi, assured him he knew many locals in Hoi An and would help with the search. Amazingly, even after all these years, Phil still had family photos of Cam, hoping they might serve as clues. After arriving in Hoi An and checking into his hotel, the guide called Phil downstairs and led him across the street. Miraculously, the guide had found a man wearing a green hat. The man examined Phil's photos and identified the people, his father and 3 siblings. He pointed to the youngest boy in the photo and said, "That's me." Then he revealed that Cam was his older brother. Without hesitation, he called Cam to come over. Phil rushed back to his hotel room, grabbed his camera and the watch, and hurried back down. As he crossed the street, he saw Cam approaching. Now 49 years old, Cam was a carpenter. The guide explained the story to Cam, who appeared bewildered, struggling to understand why someone would travel halfway across the globe just to see him and deliver a watch. The guide then pointed to Phil and asked Cam, "Do you remember this man?" Cam replied. Yes, he used to carry a little dog on his back. The guide followed up with a question about the watch promise 40 years ago. Cam said, Yes, I remember. I was only 9 years old at the time, barely able to speak English. I thought there must have been some misunderstanding. Phil and the guide reassured him. There was no misunderstanding. It was simply that Phil had failed to fulfill his promise. Phil handed the watch to Cam, who began to cry. The two embraced, tears streaming down their faces. The next evening, Cam invited Phil to his home for dinner. Cam's wife, Ngo, and their daughter, Vi, prepared the meal while Phil, his wife, Lynn, and the guide joined them at the table. In Vietnamese tradition, guests are expected only to eat, enjoy, and leave afterward. Vi, Cam's eldest daughter, was 28 at the time and recently married. She confided her dream of attending college, like her 4 younger brothers. However, in their rural area, opportunities for women to pursue higher education were limited. On the way back to the hotel, Lynn reflected on Vi's aspirations and suggested they help her achieve her goal. With the guide's assistance, Vi was able to enroll in a university in Saigon alongside her brothers. She earned a bridging diploma in 2010 and a bachelor's degree in 2012. Phil returned to Vietnam, perhaps for the last time, in 2012 to attend Vi's graduation. He and Lynn also purchased plane tickets for Cam and Ngo to join them in Saigon. It was Cam's first time on a plane, and he brought an assortment of homemade treats to host a celebratory feast at Vi's lodging. Lynn and Phil also gifted Ngo a microwave oven to make her cooking easier. Today, Vi works in Saigon and keeps in regular contact with the Seymours. A promise that once seemed trivial and inconsequential had haunted Phil for 40 years, stirring memories of a war-torn, shattered countryside. Determined to find the boy he had once met, Phil sought to bring closure to a chapter that had weighed on his heart for decades. Reflecting on the experience, Phil shared, "If I had broken a promise to an adult, I wouldn't have carried this regret for so long. But this was a promise to a kind, innocent child, a child who didn't beg or plead, who always wore a smile. War leaves deep and lasting scars on those who endure it. Yet the innocence of Cam and other children asking for candy offered a rare comfort to soldiers like Phil. Their purity and smiles provided fleeting moments of peace, helping soldiers endure the relentless anguish and chaos of the battlefield. A simple promise changed lives across decades and continents. What are your thoughts on this incredible journey of love and redemption? Share your comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this.